All right, stop. Before you delete all your pictures and videos from your SD cards from the last card pull of the season, you're going to want to watch this video and listen to Don Higgins and Aaron Warbritton talk about annual trail camera data and what it could mean for this upcoming season. So don't delete them yet. Learn why you need to organize them and pay attention to what deer did this year, because it's more likely going to have an impact on how they're going to act next year and the likelihood of you filling your tag. So let's get into it. Here we go.
We'll just jump right into it because we don't want to beat around the bush. We want to talk about your trail camera strategies, and one thing that we kind of admire is your ability to organize all your photos better than probably 99.9% of people, because unless it's a 150-inch deer, whatever deer they're looking for, they press delete. So walk us through your thought process and how you organize them.
Well, I organize them by location, and that's where it all starts. And I try to save at least some pictures of the younger bucks, every buck that I get, because you never know which one is going to blow up and really be huge when they're young. So I try to save some pictures of every buck I get on a property, just for a database. And then a lot of times, like the buck I shot in 2017 Trump, he was not a buck that even caught my attention until he was 6 years old. And so I really wasn't paying attention to him at all. But then all of a sudden, boom, here a giant shows up on camera, and I'm thinking, who is this? This is a new buck that moved into the area. But then I go back through that database, and I see, well, this was him the year before. It wasn't as big, of course, but the shape of the rack and, brow tines give him away a lot. But by backtracking, that's how I figured out how old he was, because I had all that history saved from that location. And, if you're not going to save them, I think the biggest mistake a lot of deer hunters make with their trail cameras is they're putting them out and they're trying to pick up on a buck's pattern that they can take advantage of tomorrow or next week. And I'm setting my cameras out this season because the pictures I get this season are not going to help me kill a buck until next year or the year before next or 3 years down the road. So it's that history that really trail cameras have really made killing big bucks easy once you figure out the finer points of utilizing that technology. And it's not instant, and I think that's the big thing that a lot of deer hunters miss on, is they want to put that trail camera out and boom, there's a picture of a big buck. So boom, that's where I go put my tree stand out, and boom, I kill him. It doesn't happen like that. It takes years of building up that history to make it happen. Yeah,
and another specific example, it was in one of North American Whitetail articles, either this summer or fall, that I alluded to before we started recording. And that was an instance where it took multiple years for you to acquire the data, and I'll let you kind of tell the story from there, because I don't want to say anything wrong.
Well, ironically, I just talked about this in a seminar about an hour and a half ago, so I had the trail cameras pictures to show for it and everything, so it won't be hard for me to relive that story. But, the buck caught my eye as a yearling because he had 6 points on one side. Actually, he had 6 on both sides. So when you start seeing a yearling with that many points on one side, he's going to catch your attention. And, so I saved several photos that year, and the next year he's back, and he's got even more. He's got 7 points on each side, forked G2s, which made him really identifiable. And so I just kept watching that buck, and he had a different summer range than he did fall-winter range. So I knew where to get his picture in the summer, and then I knew where to get his picture in the fall. And the buck, by the time he was 4 years old, he was in the 170s, and he never got much bigger. The year I shot him as a 6-year-old, he just barely nudged 180. But I guess the whole, the main part of the story is that I use those trail camera photos to put his pattern together. Now, in that buck's entire home range, I only had one property that I could hunt. And that property was a small property. There was a home and a barn. A couple lived in it, and, they don't spend a lot of time outside apparently. And there's a small draw behind their barn that shoots out into open corn and soybean fields, between a quarter and a half a mile long. It never gets much wider than about 50 yards. But as the hunting pressure picks up on the properties surrounding that draw, there's always a group of does that like to bed in that draw, and on a real regular basis. I always have a trail camera in that draw, and that's where I got the very first pictures of the buck you're talking about. But the real pattern that I picked up on was that buck didn't stay in that draw. He would start showing up there about November 6th every year, and his last visit was always around November 20th. So there was like a 2-week window in the middle of November when that buck was in and out of that draw on a fairly regular basis looking for does, I'm sure. So, I had stands ready to kill that buck 2 years before I ever hunted for him. And I had one on each side of that draw for different wind directions. And when he finally hit 6 years old, and I didn't think he was going to get much bigger, I put him on the hit list, and that fall went after him. But I knew that, the plan was easy because I had the trail camera history from all those years. I literally watched that buck for 6 years in the summer in velvet, and this was his 6th fall. And I knew I had to hunt that draw between November 6th and the 20th. And my plan was every day that the wind allowed between those dates, I was going to hunt one of them 2 stands. November 6th, the wind was wrong. It was blowing right up and down the draw, so there's no way I could hunt either stand. November 7th, the wind was wrong. Finally, in the morning of November 8th, got a northeast wind, which was perfect for one of the stands. I slipped in and I killed that buck the very first morning I ever hunted for him, even though I'd watched him for 6 years. It sounds like there's a bit of luck involved, and there always is to some degree, but that trail camera history allowed me to know when and where to be. And the big thing is when. Another quirk I've noticed among mature bucks is that they will show up in the same place every year at the same time as far as date-wise. And trail cameras have shown me that. I actually wrote an article, first detail on that in 2003, titled Same Time, Same Place, that appeared in North American Whitetail. And at that time, that was the first I'd ever heard of anybody talk about it. Now, it's pretty common knowledge today, but to that point, I'd never heard anybody talk about it. And it's just, as the years have gone by since that article came out, I just reinforce my belief in that idea that those bucks are going to show up at the same time, at the same place, year after year after year. And so I use trail cameras more to pick up on annual patterns of a buck rather than day-to-day patterns. I think that's a big mistake deer hunters make, is they're trying to pick up on a day-to-day pattern. Well, this buck shows up at this food plot every day at 4 o'clock. Well, it just doesn't happen like that. But those annual patterns, when you know where to hunt a buck and when to hunt him, you can be a step ahead of him waiting on him to show up rather than a step behind him. Well, I got his picture here last week, I'm going to hunt here. Well, you're a step behind. You need to be waiting on him when he shows up, and that's what trail cameras have allowed me to do and really push my success to the next level.
The long-term stuff is where we seem to learn the most, and we do a ton of our scouting during the summer, like boots on the ground scouting. And when we're out there, we're diving straight into the middle of bedding areas, and we're finding setups. We're dissecting whole sections of ground at times, right now, because we're turkey hunting all spring. Ideally, we'd do this in the spring, but we're turkey hunting all spring, so just by default, we end up scouting a ton during the summer. All the way up to September. So when we're diving into these areas, we pack cameras with us, and then we hang them in very sensitive spots, whether it be like a signpost rub or a scrape trail intersection in the middle of a bedding area. They're the spots that you're not going to go into unless you're going in there one time to kill a deer in the fall. And in many cases, we don't even hunt those areas. We'll just leave them there.
Yeah.
We'll just leave them.
Or hunt somewhere close by, like the Buck Museum. We kind of hunted the periphery of that area, but never actually got into where the camera was at.
That's true. Yeah.
So you're just seeing, obviously, solid bucks in the area, and then you left that camera to soak until after the season?
Yeah, or we weren't even seeing bucks. We just found sign, and it was – we scout so many different bedding areas, whether it's public or private, across the board. We're always looking at new stuff, and – It's very hard to dissect everything that's going on in that section in one season, and especially when you're being careful with your pressure. That's why we try to learn as much as we can from the first boots on the ground session in there, but then stick a camera in there and let it soak. And that's where we get real excited about the long-term strategy. And it's hard for people to do that because they want to check their cameras all the time. But I'm telling you, the stuff we learn from those cameras that we leave from August to December or January, I mean, we even set them up in January and leave them until May sometimes and learn interesting stuff about how the deer transition from winter patterns to spring patterns and different food sources that they use and so on and so forth. You just learn so much when you can leave it there in one of those locations where the deer are spending a ton of time in daylight. You get to see what time of year bucks were in a bedding area, what, bucks are in the area, obviously.
What bucks made it through the season
What bucks
after the
made
gun
it through.
seasons are over.
Yep. And what food sources are hot at a given time. Your scent sits there in front of that camera for 7 to 10 days or whatever. I don't know how long it is. But then after that, especially if you're on private land where you can control the pressure, you're learning all this valuable data about the bucks and the bedding area that you scouted throughout the course of the fall. Like you just have this thing that's collecting all this stuff all the time. And it's going to do a better job without you messing with it. So we've had a lot of good examples of that over the years where we've got pictures of bucks on one of those long-term trail camera sets. One fall, went back to the same location the next fall, and were able to set up on that movement that we got off the camera, maybe even set up on that specific buck, in that same time frame that you got him on. I mean, when we had it in the museum where we had it over the signpost rub, that was awesome data because it was right in the center of this bedding area. And it was almost where we would set up to hunt it. It was, we probably wouldn't go quite as far in there as where the camera was set up, but we would get within sight of that camera. And there was a 2-week period where we had a mature buck in daylight on that thing almost every single day.
Yep.
And that's not because they're not nocturnal. That's because it's right in the bedding area where they feel safe. That's my opinion.
What was that 2-week span? I'm just curious to where the majority of that traffic was daylight in that bedding area.
It was late October.
Late October into the first 10, 12 days of November, something like that.
But there was one buck in there that was on there more than the rest of them throughout the whole fall. And granted, this camera's set up over a signpost rub, so it's something that's going to obviously get more traffic as the rut comes in. If you have it over a trail intersection of some kind, maybe a scrape or something like that, you might see slightly different activity. The camera's only going to pick up so much.